So why does Farage have such a cult following? What is going on here? Let's talk about this with political commentator Theo Usherwood and the political commentator Suzanne Evans. Welcome to you both. I mean, Theo, you've reported on politics for a long, long time. You've interviewed Nigel Farage for a long, long time. In fact, not that long ago, you and I used to work with Mr. Farage. I mean, well, he's got something, right? There is something he has. Even when it came to broadcasting, he was given a job on the radio and people would think, you know, politicians are generally not that good at this kind of stuff. He was very good at it.
A large part of politics, Ian, good afternoon, is sales. How well can you sell something to the public? And Nigel Farage has that ability to sell, whether it be Brexit, whether it be his form of right-wing politics, very well, very convincingly. And I think when you position him and you juxtapose him against other politicians from the mainstream parties, Labour and the Conservatives, he's just a much better salesperson. He's much better. Now, you can make an argument that actually what he's selling is snake oil, if you wish to. You could say that Brexit hasn't turned out the way that he said it would turn out. But yet here he is again, selling his brand of right-wing politics to a particular proportion of the electorate in this general election. And again, he's proving to be very good at it. And I think what the mainstream politicians haven't figured out at the moment is how to price match what Nigel Farage does. They're not on the same level as what he does. Now, you can have the argument again and again and again about whether he's actually selling something that in reality turns out to be true, as in the benefits of Brexit, for example. But here he is again doing what he does best. And nobody's figured out really how to deal with that.
Yes, spot on. I mean, Suzanne, you know Nigel as well. You know, we use that term X factor in entertainment, but you know it's applicable here with a very few politicians have it, but he's one of the ones that does. Is he just, as Theo alluded to there, is he just a good salesman? Is it as simple as that?
No, I don't think it's as simple as that at all. I don't think he's a salesman. I think he comes across so well as he does because he believes it. He's not just trying to sell something, anything to make money or get himself a profile. He is a true conviction politician. And that is the crucial difference, I think. You know, what does Rishi Sunak stand for? I don't really know. I don't think he particularly stands for conservative values. What does Keir Starmer stand for? Can you really say he's a socialist? I don't think so. You know, you look at the leaders' debate last night, it was pretty dull. That was my overarching view of it anyway. But yet Nigel Farage, like him or loathe him, and people very feel strongly either way very often, is believing in something. And I think that's arguably what's made him the most successful politician of my generation. He fought for Brexit, and despite never having a seat in Parliament, although I think that is going to change, hopefully, come July the 4th, he got the job done. He helped to deliver Brexit. We would never have had that EU referendum had the then UKIP been snapping at David Cameron's heels and forced him to announce that he would get an EU referendum going when he won a Conservative majority, which he did, unexpectedly, I have to say. And here we are where we are. But yeah, no, he's not a salesman, Theo. It's because he believes it, and that's what makes him different, and what makes him, I think, come across so powerfully.
Yeah, so it's a bit more than just a veneer, Theo.
I don't doubt that Nigel Farage believes it, but I'm just saying in terms of turning what he's proposing into a reality for voters out there, there are question marks, and there are those who question whether it can actually be done. Now, I don't deny or I don't doubt Nigel Farage's conviction. I think he can be very convicted. He shows a great deal of conviction in everything that he turns his hand to. And I agree completely with Susan's point. Would we have had the EU referendum in 2016 without Nigel Farage? The answer to that has to be no. Without Nigel Farage, Theresa May probably got her deal through the House of Commons by hook or by crook, which actually wouldn't have amounted to a fantastic deal and would have tied us to EU rules completely? Probably yes, because there wouldn't have been that pressure on Conservative MPs to vote it down 3 and what would have been a 4th time in the House of Commons back in 2019. And therefore, I don't doubt Nigel Farage's latest project to get into Parliament at the 8th time of asking. I think this is probably his best chance yet, and one of the reasons that actually he changed his mind and decided to go for it. And I don't doubt his conviction in trying to remold right-wing politics in this country, which is ultimately the project of what he's trying to do. And he's been very open about that when he gave in his interviews with people, that he wants to shape the right wing politics in this country. And I don't doubt whether he will be able to do that, or at least have a very good stab at doing that, given his track record where he's been successful in the past. But you've got to ask questions, and I think fair questions, about whether this country has asked too much of itself by leaving the European Union, that it simply wasn't possible, and we haven't had the ability to take the promises of leaving the European Union and translate that into a reality of making people better off. I think that's a fair question to ask.
Suzanne?
I fundamentally disagree. The problem has been is that we had politicians who didn't have Nigel Farage's conviction rolling out the Brexit referendum result. You mentioned yourself Theresa May. Boris made a complete hash of it. Then we had COVID, which put everything off the table, basically, because nobody had time to do anything to focus on Brexit. It was all COVID, COVID, COVID. And I think if we had Reform MPs in Parliament, then I think something is more likely to be done. I mean, the thing about the EU referendum was, and I remember discussing this at the time, we're putting forward, I was part of the board of Vote Leave, we were putting forward what could be possible when Britain left the European Union. And one of the questions we asked ourselves, but it's not up to us, the Vote Leave board is not going to be running this out, it's going to be whoever happens to be in Westminster at the time. And I just don't think they had the gumption to take it and run with it effectively. And neither, of course, did the civil service. And that is key here. I think we have too many politicians in Parliament who are not prepared to stand up to the civil service. They are not prepared to follow the old rule, as it should be, is that the politicians set the policy and the agenda, and the civil servants execute that policy agenda. Unfortunately, it seems to be too often the other way around. And I've spoken umpteen times to ministers who say, you know, they get into office and the first thing that happens is the civil service in their department come running to them with their little pet policies and telling them why their own policies that they've been elected to won't work. So this is a problem that we have. And I think if any party is actually prepared to drive out the benefits of Brexit and is prepared to tackle the rot, I think, that is in the blob, as Dominic Cummings famously called it, the civil service, then I think it's the Reform Party. And I think they have a good chance. You know, the polling was showing that Reform could win up to 11 seats even before Nigel Farage took over leadership of the party again. Personally, I think that's optimistic. But I think now Farage is head of Reform and is standing in Clacton. There are other seats, such as Lee Anderson's seat in Ashfield. Richard Tice is standing in Boston and Skegness, where UKIP's done very well previously. We've got Gainsborough in Lincolnshire, Great Yarmouth, again, a great UKIP stronghold with a very good candidate for Reform there, Rupert Lowe, standing. I think these are all now very winnable seats, and politics could change.
Theo,
I just want to come. I want to come in there. Actually, I don't think, and I think the first thing that's really important to say, it's really important that from Nigel Farage's perspective, he has to get into Parliament this time around. He has to win Clacton. But actually, if you look beyond that, I don't think the project from Nigel Farage's point of view should just be focusing on reform, getting Reform MPs. What he needs to be doing to be successful is he needs to be trying to manipulate the Conservative Party. And what I mean by that is Reform needs to be, he needs to be thinking about what sort of Conservative Party is going to be in the House of Commons, albeit in opposition, after this general election. So what Reform needs to be doing, and this is what I suspect they will be doing, because I know Nigel Farage has a head for this kind of stuff, is going after Remain Tory MPs, which at the moment, if you go back to that MRP poll at the end of last week, at the moment are looking like they're safe. And there are only about 140 of them. So he needs to be trying to bring in good, campaign hard in those particular seats, therefore bringing in Labour MPs by the back door. And then he needs to be finding those Conservative MPs who are currently going to lose their seats, but who are subscribed to his project and his right-wing, his brand of right-wing politics, and going in and trying to save them. People I'm thinking about there, Jacob Rees-Mogg down in North East Somerset, he could be a really crucial ally for Nigel Farage in the House of Commons. And if Nigel Farage can get down there, if you like, the Reform Party, give him a sort of kite mark and say, okay, he may be on the Conservative ticket here, but actually he's one of us. He's somebody that we like and that we want to save. So if you're a Reform voter or you don't like the Tories, think about it as a vote for Jacob Rees-Mogg and not a vote for Rishi Sunak and the Conservative Party. That's the path to success for Nigel Farage, not fretting about Reform candidates beyond himself and Richard Tice.
Can I just extend that theory a little here, Theo, as well? And I don't know what you make of this, Suzanne. Let's assume Nigel Farage does win in Clacton. He becomes an MP. That puts him on the green benches. It allows him to be in a very different position as a sitting MP. Eventually, somehow, either by crossing the floor or some other seductive manoeuvre, becomes a Conservative MP or starts to enlist Conservatives to become Reform MP, whatever way you want to slice it. Therefore, he becomes the official opposition. Steve Bannon said a couple of weeks ago he will be the next Prime Minister. That's his MO on this. That's what he's trying to do. Something of that nature is going to take place as the cogwheels turn. That is part of Nigel's bigger plan. Is it? Do you see it as something like that, Suzanne Evans?
It's certainly possible, but I'm not personally. I know Nigel has talked about going back to the Conservative Party, rejoining the Conservatives, taking over the Conservative Party. But the Conservatives. I mean, there was a poll, wasn't there? A Survation poll's just come out. The Tories are predicted to have only 71 seats. I mean, that's an astonishing wipeout.
Yeah, it was
really.
a horrific poll. That for the Tories, wasn't it? I hope they haven't seen it. Somehow.
The kind of scenario that both you and Theo are outlining here is certainly possible, but it will take time. As for nipping off to campaign for Jacob Rees-Mogg, then that's all very well and good. But Nigel has got to focus on Clacton as well. There's no doubt about that. Yeah. He had a huge reception for the people in Clacton yesterday. He's got to be seen in the constituency, I think, to win, because of course all the other are now going to chuck all their resources into Clacton to try and stop him. And
one thing I thought, just to go back to the kind of nature of the man, Theo, when post the milkshake problem, he sat down and he got a little bit upset, I think, talking about what had happened. It's happened to him before, of course, people throwing something at you. It's not a good look. I don't think any of us, no serious person endorses that. But when asked, why does it happen to you? I thought his answer was brilliant. He said, because I'm the only one that gets out there and actually speaks to people. He presses the flesh. He's in the thick of it. He doesn't mind that. We all know, because all us three here know him. If you bumped to him, if he was sitting in a corner of a bar on his own having a pint and you joined him, he would buy you a pint and have a chat to you for half an hour. That is the nature of Nigel Farage.
But also, I think what Nigel Farage does quite well, and we last time you invited me on your programme, Ian, we were talking about that BBC newsreader who described him as using his customary inflammatory language. Yeah. And I made the point that he's almost defined by those who hate him, right? He's, as Susan was saying, he's a Marmite, love him or hate him character. And by somebody throwing a milkshake over him, you've got the photographs, but you've also got voters thinking, actually, I feel slightly sympathetic towards this guy because he's out there taking part in democracy and trying to get people's votes. Now, you might not vote for him, you may not like him, you may hate him, in fact, but that doesn't mean that you have a right to throw a milkshake over him. True. And I think you'll get some sympathy from those, maybe all those who are already sympathetic to him. But sometimes when you play Nigel Farage, if you play the man, not the ball, you end up coming worse off.
Yeah. And on that point, Suzanne, a final point. Yesterday I interviewed Alan Sked. I'm sorry to raise that name. I'm sure you've discombobulated at the mere memory of. Today I interviewed Peter Oborne. Both of them were anything but complimentary about Nigel Farage. Very, very strong words they had to say. Very tricky words they had to say legally as well. But, I challenge them on that. But it does bear out what Theo was saying there. He is almost defined by those that hate him, because any Farage fan or supporter listens to that, it almost confirms why they like Nigel Farage.
Well, we Brits love the underdog, don't we? And I think sometimes Farage comes across as the underdog. A lot of people have been criticising him because he stood for Parliament 8 times and hasn't won before. But I see very differently. I see a man who says, if at first you don't succeed, try again. A man who gets up and does it and sticks to his guns. I think that's an enviable spirit. It's an enviable British quality, arguably, and one that I think endears him to the public.
OK, thank you. Suzanne Evans, always great to have you on. Theo Usherwood, always fabulous to talk, Theo. Thank you guys for that.